The gate section is on the lower left. We turn it on or off with this button. And we have an inverse mode, which is interesting. It can toggle between regular gate mode or this inverse mode that lets you hear the part of the signal that'll be attenuated by the gate. So it's kind of like a listen function, but it can also be used creatively as a ducking kind of function. Now, we also have the key input when we're running a sidechain input, and we'll look at an example of that in a few minutes. But for now, I want to give you a couple of examples of kind of traditional, typical gate use. Now, the idea is that we set a threshold level here, and when the signal falls below the threshold, it'll get attenuated by the amount that we have set in the range. And then we have a release control to set the release time at which the signal recovers from the gate processing when it no longer crosses the threshold. And then we have hysteresis, which is interesting. It's a dedicated opening threshold for the gate that we use by setting its distance relative to the closing release time that we have here. So it's useful to avoid a gate stuttering, chattering effect. But what's more interesting about it is that when we turn it completely counterclockwise, we get into expander mode, which just reduces signals rather than gating them out. It's a subtle difference, but there is a difference. So here's a pretty typical example of a gate. This is on the snare drum track. And we hear a lot of leakage of the kick and the hi-hat. Now the idea is we can't eliminate it all because we don't want to lose the grace notes on the snare. This is what it's cutting out or reducing. So here I've got a long release. Well, first of all, I have my threshold set over here. And when we activate the pull, it'll shift the range from minus 25 dB to plus 15 all the way to minus 5 to plus 35. But that's not what I want. So too much, and we're losing all the signal. Now if I have a long release here, but if I bring up the hysteresis, we're also losing too much of the signal. If I go into expansion mode, it's not bringing it down enough. So I don't mind if there's a bit of leakage. I don't want to lose the grace notes, but if I can minimize it, that's useful. Bringing it down more. Now I'm not bringing it down at all. And this engages a kind of fast attack mode, which actually works with this. Now here's another example, again, typical use case on the kick drum. I'll start with it off. You hear the snare leaking. So again, I have this set similarly. My threshold is different. I don't want it to cut too much. Here the hysteresis isn't doing too much because I have a very quick release. Now I could use the fast attack, but it really cuts the attack too much. Another typical example is on an electric guitar where there's natural electrical noise that's very low level, and gates can clean this up. Here's an example. I'm going to start with this off. You hear it in the spaces in between. And with it in. These are pretty much the default settings. Got a gentle threshold. Aggressive gain reduction or noise reduction. Let me start with this a little bit higher. Try the fast attack. Too much of this, and it might cut out some of the sustain, which you got to be careful of. Expansion isn't doing enough gain reduction. Somewhere around there feels good. Without it. So that hum at the beginning. with it. And you can see the response here. I have a little beat here with a drum loop, bass, and pad sound. Here's what it sounds like. Now I've got this set up for the sidechain to listen to that drum loop. So as I bring it in, I'm going to turn on the gate, and I'm going to turn on the key input. So now the pad sound is being gated in response to what it's listening to at the sidechain, the rhythm of the drums. I can go for a really quick release, for a very staccato sound, or longer. They all have different creative uses. Now I can blend in the range to get some of the sustain going through as well. So there I get the sustain and the accents of the drums versus without it. But the more I dial it up, the more it's attenuating the part. Now if I set the threshold lower, it won't all get through, so some of the sustain comes through too. So you can get subtle accents like that. You can go for a quick attack. And the hysteresis is set to expansion. This works for a nice clean gate, but too much, and it cuts away too much when it works in conjunction with this release. Now, once you do this, you don't actually need to play the drum loop in the mix. For example, here it is muted. And you can actually use another drum loop. For example, let's go back to the original loop. And what I'm going to do is feed the bass into the side chain here. And I have a software instrument playing the bass. And now it'll pump along to the rhythm of the bass. Do shorter. And here it's cutting away too much as we dial the hysteresis up. But we don't want expansion, we want gating. Now I can go to inverse mode and we'll get a swelling effect. And again, we can blend some of it in. So it's more like swelling and accents with the sustain underneath, or the full range. And that's without the faster attack. And as we dial this up, because it's in inverse mode, we're getting a much more different kind of rhythm to the swell. So there's a lot of both practical and creative applications with the gate. We'll move on to the compressor section in the next video.